Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? My name is Wendy Myers of MyersDetox.com. And today we're going to be talking about copper toxicity and all of the issues surrounding copper toxicity, what role copper plays in the body, some symptoms of copper toxicity, how to find out if you're copper toxic, where we pick up copper in our environment, and some tips to detox copper. So this is kind of a complex subject, because we need copper in our body. We need copper for a lot of different things. Copper can cause mood disorders. We need it for our mental health. It can cause our nerve cells to overfire and cause pain syndromes because copper is found in throughout our nervous system. It's kind of how we conduct electricity in our body. It's in our bones and connective tissues. It's required to fix calcium in our bones and build and repair all of our connective tissue. That includes our skin, our hair, our nails, arteries, and people can have copper imbalance. They can have issues with their hair, skin, and nails. And we need it for energy production of the cells that's needed to make energy and our Krebs cycle, our ATP. And any problem here causes fatigue and depression and other imbalances related to low energy. We need it for our immune system. Copper has to remain in balance with zinc. And when it's not, one's more prone to all types of infections, in particular fungal and yeast infections that are really common today. And some people have, intestinal yeast if they eat a lot of sugars, and chronic sinus infections and other types of infections when they have copper imbalance. And then there's our glandular system. Our thyroid and adrenal glands are extremely sensitive to copper, and it's very commonly seen in copper imbalance. People can have hypothyroidism and even hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease and all kinds of different issues related to the thyroid. Copper can cause problems in the reproductive system. So copper is really closely related to estrogen metabolism, and it's required for women's fertility and to maintain pregnancy. And any imbalance can cause every conceivable female organ-related difficulty, such as premenstrual syndrome, ovarian cyst, infertility, miscarriages, sexual dysfunctions, and more. And it affects men less than women in this area, but it can affect men's potency and sexual drive like it can with women, because if men have high copper, they can have high estrogen levels and be estrogen dominant, and that can affect their sex drive and libido. And then in the nervous system, copper stimulates production of the neurotransmitters epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And it's also required for serotonin production. So if copper is really deeply involved with all aspects of the central nervous system, so imbalances can be very highly associated with many psychological, emotional, and neurological conditions. And these can include memory loss, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and others. So obviously copper is very, very important role in the body, and I want to talk about some of the ways that we can become toxic in copper and some of the ways that we can get excess copper in our body. And number one is taking birth control. So taking the birth control pill increasing estrogen levels will also increase copper levels, because when estrogen rises, copper rises also. Copper IUD, which is the intrauterine devices used for birth control, can also cause excess copper. A lot of the IUDs are made from copper because copper kills sperm cells. It also kills bacteria, and it's very, very effective in an IUD. But some women can become copper toxic because this copper kind of leaches into their body, into their reproductive organs, and can cause a whole host of reproductive issues as a result. Hormone replacement therapy, HRT, gives a lot of estrogen, which can raise copper levels. You can also get copper, it can be acquired at birth. So if your mom was copper toxic, you can become copper toxic. Copper water pipes can be culprits, but I haven't found a huge correlation with that. I've tested thousands of clients for their hair mineral analysis, and also I've done blood work for copper and other things that are indicators of copper and blood work, like ceruloplasmin, and have not found a huge correlation with copper water pipes, which many people have, and copper toxicity, though it is possible. But copper can be added to tap water as a fungicide. So that can be problematic. Copper can be added by municipal water sources to control fungus. Copper is also added to pools. So people swimming in pools a lot can become copper toxic as a result. Copper cookware is problematic. Copper can also leach to the body from dental amalgam fillings, so mercury fillings. This is more of a problem after the 1980s. So prior to the 1980s, mercury amalgam fillings had very little copper, if any copper at all, but it was more difficult for dentists to work with that material. So if you had mercury amalgam fillings prior to 1980, then you're not going to have so much copper in them. But after the 1980s, copper started being added, and it made it much easier for dentists to work with the material. So every time you bite down on those mercury fillings, you can be releasing copper into your system, your brain, your nervous system, and can cause a whole host of problems that I just listed. Copper can also be found in fertilizers, in industrial emissions, so we can breathe it in. It can be found in jewelry also. If you are wearing any copper jewelry, it can leach into your skin. Copper is also really high in vitamins, especially prenatal vitamins. So people need to be really, really careful when they're supplementing, that they're typically wanting to take a copper-free multivitamin. That's best advised. And it's pretty crazy, when, I was pregnant, I was taking a prenatal vitamin, and the prenatal vitamins have 4 milligrams of copper. I mean, it's just an exorbitant amount, especially given that when women are pregnant, they have really high estrogen levels. They produce more estrogen than they will the entire rest of their life. And with that comes excess copper. And so it takes a lot of copper to make the baby's brain and nervous system. That's why it's given in prenatal vitamins, but it's 4 milligrams a day is a lot. And a lot of pregnant women become copper toxic as a result of ingestion of so much copper. And vegetarian diets in general are very high in copper, namely because you're eating a lot of beans, nuts, copper-rich foods of that nature, and you're also typically not eating zinc-rich meats. There is zinc in nuts and whatnot, but it's generally not very bioavailable because of the phytates in nuts, unless you're soaking them. So because of the high copper in the diet and you don't have enough zinc to oppose the copper, vegetarian and vegan diets lend themselves to copper toxicity. And then there's occupational exposure as well. But that's pretty much the list of places where you can become copper toxic. And we already went over some of the symptoms, but I can go over a few more symptoms. People with copper toxicity can have acne. They can have adrenal hyperactivity or insufficiency. They can have allergies, alopecia or hair loss. They can have anemia, arthritis. They can have cancers as a result. There's actually an interesting study that was done with sheep in Australia, and they removed all the copper from the soil, so that the sheep didn't have any copper at all, and they developed cancers. And when they added copper back into the soils, where in the grass where the sheep were feeding, then they didn't have as many cancers. So you need some amount of copper, but too little, too much causes a problem. People with copper toxicity can also have elevated cholesterol, elevated estrogen or estrogen dominance. They can have fatigue. They can have bone fractures. They can have headaches. Copper toxicity definitely is a big factor in people who have chronic headaches or migraines. They can have heart attacks, high blood pressure, hyperactivity. They can have hypoglycemia. They can have insomnia. So insomnia is a big factor of people with copper toxicity, where they're exhausted, but their mind is just racing, where they can't go to sleep. That's a classic sign of copper toxicity. People can have iron storage issues, where they store too much iron, become iron toxic. Morley Robbins talks a lot about that, about the role of iron and copper toxicity. People can have liver and kidney dysfunction, decreased libido. They can have mood swings. They can have nausea, nervousness, pancreatic dysfunction, panic attacks, phobias. They can have, kind of feeling kind of spaced out. Another classic sign of being copper toxic is being a little bit spaced out or dreamy, kind of in a dreamy state. A lot of actors can be copper toxic. Very creative people can be copper toxic as well. It really lights their brain on fire and really makes them very, very creative. And anyone maybe that started supplementing with copper might have found that. I certainly found that my brain really turned on when I've supplemented the copper in the past. It's a really nice feeling. But if you supplement with too much of it, you can become copper toxic, so you have to be careful with that. People can also have urinary tract infections, infections of all types, and even tooth decay as a result, because copper is really integral in forming bone. And so I want to talk a little bit about testing for copper, like how do you find out if you're copper toxic? So that is not as simple as it seems. You can do a hair mineral analysis, a hair tissue mineral analysis, and many people that are copper toxic do show high levels of copper on their hair mineral analysis. And I've seen families where we have a mother and their children can all be copper toxic because the children got the copper from the mother. But more often than not, the hair mineral analysis won't show copper toxicity. And that's where some blood testing is in order, where you need to test your copper levels, your ceruloplasmin, and your zinc. And Morley Robbins talks a lot about this on he has an amazing group called the Magnesium Advocacy Group on Facebook, which I highly recommend that you guys join. So he talks a lot about this stuff. And so it's, so that those kind of tests, I really can't go into those and what qualifies one as copper toxic based on blood tests. But it's because it's very, very complicated. It requires working with a practitioner to determine that. But if you are copper toxic, you have to do a hair mineral analysis and some blood work to determine your levels. And then even then, it's not that simple. So copper toxicity is very elusive, but we tend to go by symptoms. If you have a lot of the symptoms of copper toxicity, we want to approach you like you may be copper toxic. And there's certain supplements that help to reduce copper in the body. Cilantro is fantastic at grabbing onto copper and detoxing it from the body. There's also something called modified citrus pectin. That's fantastic at detoxing copper. So is a product called Intestinal Metal Detox. That's by Quicksilver Scientific. That is fantastic at getting into your gut and preventing copper absorption from your diet or supplements or water into your gut, so you can reduce that intake or ingestion of copper if you are copper toxic. It's essential. Another thing that's great at removing copper are zeolites. So I love this product. It's Cyto Detox. This is my favorite zeolite. This is a new formulation from Dr. Daniel Pompa, which I've been taking. I think it's a fantastic product, very effective, shown in the research to remove copper. Garlic, also a natural way to detox copper. But one of the most effective ways to detox copper is supplementing with molybdenum. So I call it Mo for short. Anytime I have a client that's copper toxic, I give them some Mo or molybdenum, and you usually want to take about 500 micrograms per day or with a meal, and that's going to help you to metabolize excess copper, to clean up copper from your blood, and also helps you to metabolize excess sulfur as well. So that's one of the most effective things if you have high copper levels, to take molybdenum. But you have to watch your levels. Some people's molybdenum can shoot up really, really fast. So you want to be careful. You don't want to be taking molybdenum for 6 months or something. It's something you take in small doses for short periods of time, like a month. So other things that detox copper are vitamin C, very effective liposomal vitamin C. Zinc is incredibly effective. You have to take zinc to oppose copper and kind of displace it from cells. Very, very important. And then alpha lipoic acid also helps to detox copper from the body. And so now I'm going to take any of your questions that you guys have. Thank you so much for joining me. It's with this talk about copper toxicity. I really appreciate you guys tuning in every week. I love doing these Facebook Lives, and we're going to be doing them every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. So let's get to our first round of questions. Wow, you guys have a lot of questions about copper toxicity. So Grace, thank you so much for joining me. So would a copper IUD ever cause an issue? So yes, copper IUDs can leach copper into the body, and I've seen many female clients that have copper IUDs that have elevated copper levels on their hair mineral analysis. So we know that they are causing problems. I don't see a correlation with every woman that has a copper IUD, but more often than not, they when they have a copper IUD, they can have high copper levels, but it's not, some people are just more susceptible to retaining copper and having copper issues in their body. And so Leslie, hi from Okinawa. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. So Patricia, so I did a hair analysis in 2016 and the copper level was 1.5 then. That's a normal level. And then in 2017, my hair analysis said the copper level was 1.3. I have below normal potassium and sodium. So the copper level on a hair mineral analysis ideally is about like 2.5. So these are pretty decent levels. Not something to really be concerned about. It might be a little bit on the low side, but very normal levels. So it's not something I really would worry about. But if people do have low copper levels, I'll tend to give them some beef liver capsules. Those have great levels of copper, balanced with zinc, balanced with some iron, and has the perfect ratio of those minerals in them, minerals/metals. So if you're concerned really low, then you can supplement with beef liver. But ultimately, you can't just go by the copper level on a hair mineral analysis. It requires looking at your symptoms, looking at a health history, possibly doing some blood work. But those levels aren't alarming to me or anything where I would automatically say you need to start taking some beef liver capsules. You need to kind of look at a person as a whole, not just the individual level of copper on a hair mineral analysis. So Donna, do you recommend drinking water from copper vessels? I personally would not drink water from copper. I don't like drinking things from metal. So even if it's stainless steel or copper or any type of metal, for me, I have a metallic taste in my mouth and so that to me tells me that there's metals leaching into the water. So I'm not a big fan of metal of any kind for drinking. So John from Rocky Point, Mexico, thank you so much for joining us. And Ethan, thanks for joining us. So Michelle, so do you know the best multi to take? So my favorite multivitamin is actually not a multivitamin. It's called Oceans Alive Marine Phytoplankton, and that's what I take every day. It has 180 different nutrients. It has every nutrient required by the body. It has all the minerals. It's just fantastic. It has all the trace minerals. And I like it because people don't have a sensitivity to it. I've never ever had anyone report that they have or developed a food sensitivity to it because it has one ingredient. It has plankton, and a lot of these food-based multivitamins have 50, 100 different foods in them. And so people, if they're taking that every single day, can eventually develop a sensitivity to it. And a lot of the other multivitamins like Centrum or some of these large supplement companies, if you can call them that, they're synthetic and they're not the right form, and they're actually more harmful to your body than good. So I don't recommend taking the synthetic multivitamins. So for me personally and for all my clients, I do the Oceans Alive Marine Phytoplankton. So Susan, good evening from the northwest suburb of Chicago. I was just reading on Google that Candida requires copper to proliferate. Is this true? Yeah, so it doesn't require it so much. I mean, there's a lot of different conditions in the body that will foster Candida or yeast overgrowth, but certainly the presence of excess copper can contribute to Candida overgrowth in the body. And this is why when women are taking birth control pills or hormone replacement therapy, that they can have a lot of yeast infections and Candida overgrowth in their gut as a result of that. So it's directly correlated. So Bernadette, makes me crazy that women with copper IUDs are not supplemented with zinc. Yeah, and if you're getting that excess copper in your body, probably a good idea, if you know you have a copper IUD, to take some zinc or eat extra red meat, so to try to balance it out. And but a lot of people are not eating red meat or are vegetarian, and they just don't get the zinc levels that they need in their body to oppose all that copper that could be leaching potentially into their body. So Bernadette, I completely lost my sense of smell and taste and became anorexic and depressed. Yeah, and that can happen. If you're zinc deficient or you have zinc metabolism and absorption utilization issues, which happens with some people, you can lose your sense of smell and taste if you're severely zinc deficient. And that could be detected on a hair mineral analysis as well. And but yeah, it's a problem. So Olga, so what about famous Tommy copper gloves and sportwear? So yeah, there's a lot of products sold on the market to help with pain, like gloves and sportswear that have copper in them that are supposed to improve performance or recovery. I don't know if I could really recommend those. I honestly don't know a ton about them, but there is something to copper, helping with recovery, and because it's copper is used in our body and our nervous system. But I really can't speak to the effectiveness of those. I have my doubts. But Brandon, so doing your first test with Dr. Lawrence, I assumed you weren't using a binder since he doesn't. So no, I first started my first detox hair mineral analysis program with Dr. Lawrence Wilson, doing his nutritional balancing program. Very, very thankful. I learned a ton from him and his website and doing his program. But no, I didn't use any binders. He's not into binders on his program, but I've just trained with a lot of different people, and I've trained with Dr. Bruce Jones, who's an incredible researcher, 35-year experienced medical doctor in practice. And in his research, he just found that you need to use binders, and that people can have a lot of unnecessary detox symptoms without taking binders. So for me and in my practice and with my clients, I use binders. So Brandon, I'm reading your diaries, my detox diary. I started writing a diary every hair test I was getting, and writing, like interpreting it, and talking about my experience. And unfortunately, I don't have more than three. I just wrote three, and then I kind of got sidetracked and started doing other things, but I should probably pick that back up. But can I see the new trace elements tests? Actually seeing bad test to average test to good test would be beneficial. Yeah, so I probably should write some more blog posts with the Trace Elements International hair test. The first tests I was doing were with Analytical Research Laboratories, ARL, so a little bit different interpretation there. Um, a few years ago or 5 years ago when I wrote those blog posts to now, it's kind of a world of difference in how I interpret and approach a hair mineral analysis. So those are kind of old. I should probably update them, but yeah, I should probably write some more of those. So I'll try to get on that. So Susan, I did a DMSA provocation challenge last week. Would that show copper toxicity? Yes, it does. So when we're doing, that's another way to test for copper toxicity, is actually doing a urine provocation test. You do two tests. You do a baseline urine, and then you do a urine provocation with DMSA. And DMSA is a very good chelator of copper. It is used by some doctors to detox copper from the body. And so by comparing those two tests, you can see one, the baseline, and the provocation. If the provocation is really, really high in copper, we know that the person's likely copper toxic. It's usually about a 1-to-4 ratio. If the copper level is 4 times higher than the baseline, we know there's probably underlying copper toxicity, and we'll proceed accordingly based on that. And so Clark, thank you for joining us. Thank you, my friend Clark. Marion, so would an older home with copper pipes be a concern with copper toxicity? Also noticing the water has a blue tinge to it, what can be done? So the blue tinge, it depends on how old the house is. I mean, how old the copper pipes are. There's certain things that can be added to water by municipal water sources that can leach copper more than other things. And so more than, other products. So that can be a concern. So copper pipes in one city may not be a problem, but copper pipes in another city can be an issue depending on what is added to the water that can leach copper from the pipes. So what I would recommend is doing a water test. We have a water test kit that tests for copper on the store.myersdetox.com, that you could test your water for copper if you have excess levels. The blue tinge, I don't totally know what that is, but just test your water. That's all that you can do, and then you can proceed accordingly based on what metals you know you have. You can also get a water filter, a whole house water filter, so you're not bathing or drinking that water. We absorb about a gallon of water for every 10-minute shower that we take. So anything that's in your pipes, any metals that are in your water, can be absorbed by your body when you're showering. So you have to be thinking about that as well when you're trying to detox and get healthy. So, Misty, are you familiar with the root cause protocol for balancing minerals? I'm curious what your opinion is of Morley Robbins' protocol. Yes, I'm very familiar with Morley's protocol. I trained with Morley for quite some time, many months, and I love Morley. I'm not 100% up to date on the newer stuff that he's doing, newer theories that he has. And I also know he has a school for practitioners to train in his protocol. But yeah, I know Morley's the expert on copper and iron metabolism and zinc and whatnot, and blood testing. So you guys want to learn more about that, you can go to the Magnesium Advocacy group on Facebook. So Brian, or Bren rather, I identify with all the high copper dysregulation symptoms, and also was tested with low zinc plasma levels and lowish histamine levels. All symptoms began after I stopped taking the birth control pills, not while I was on them for years. Any ideas here? Well, it's one of those things where when you stop taking the birth control pill, your copper levels are going to start coming down, like your estrogen levels start coming down, and then your copper levels can start coming down as well, as a result. And you start getting things like hair loss, night sweats, all the things like after you had a baby, your estrogen levels come down, you start getting all these different symptoms. And but unfortunately, after that initial hurdle you overcome, you can still have excess copper in your tissues and certain organs that are in your nervous system that are causing problems. So while a lot of you probably notice exaggerated symptoms once you stop the birth control pills, because of that hump, you can still continue to have maybe lower level problems after that. But hard to really say without a health history or knowing exactly what your symptoms are to discuss it further. So Teresa, we just changed our whole home water system because our water was so bad. My concern is that they add copper. So I'm also positive I'm copper toxic. Is there anything I can do to counteract this without having to replace the system, since it wasn't cheap? So you're probably talking about some systems have copper in the system. I just don't see any correlation to I forget what it's called offhand. It's like a copper type of system. It starts with a K. It's not coming to me right now. There's certain type of water filtration stage in some water filtration systems that have copper in them that can kill fungus and kill bacteria and things like that. I don't see that as adding any copper to the water at all. There's very little contact with water over that filtration part. I've actually done a podcast with Igor Mitlevsky, Pure Effects water filters, and we talked specifically about that the issue with copper filtration mediums in water systems. And he's the expert on water filtration systems, and he hasn't found any correlation whatsoever with copper filtration mediums and not leaching copper into the water. So I don't think there's any issue there whatsoever. So Amy from Nebraska, my son's heavy metal test does not have copper on it. Well, it's one of those things where boys tend not to have copper issues so much. They can certainly have copper issues. Women tend to be more prone to copper issues, copper imbalance, copper toxicity because of their higher estrogen levels. But you can always do maybe the next test with a test that has copper, either a TEI, Trace Elements International Hair Mineral Analysis, or a Trace Mineral International Urine DMSA Challenge test, depending on how old he is. But those can give you some information about copper, but I don't think it'd be a huge concern. But you never know. You want to test, don't guess. So, Sapphire, can you say more about why we develop food sensitivities to foods we eat regularly? Does it always happen? Why does it happen? Are some foods that are okay to eat regularly? Okay, so when it comes to food sensitivity development, when you think about how we evolved over millions of years, we evolved as nomadic. We were always traveling around, eating different foods. We were eating foods in season, and there were a vast more array of foods that we were eating. So we were always eating different foods. We might have eaten a food for a couple, 3 days, in a row. But today, there's people that are eating chicken and broccoli every single night, or they're eating the same breakfast because it's just easy. They get in kind of a rut, especially a lot of guys are guilty of that, of eating the same food. It's just super easy. And the problem is our immune systems were not designed for that. When you're having the same types of food every single day, it sends a signal to our immune system that something's wrong, and then our body can then develop a sensitivity to certain foods, and it's simply because we evolved over millions of years eating a large array of foods. So it's very, very important to eat a big variety of foods, not eat any food for more than, say, 3 days in a row. Just do a rotation diet, and that can prevent any kind of issues. Same thing goes with supplements. It's good to rotate supplements as well, because people after 6 months or so, they can start where a supplement work really, really well. After 6 months or so, just as a general rule of thumb, that can then cause problems or cause inflammation or not really be working anymore. So we just want to be aware of how the body works, how the body has evolved, and work with it in that way. Have some awareness around how the body works when it comes to food. And so, are there some foods that are okay to eat regularly? Certainly, but it's just very individual. So everyone is so individual in the foods that they tolerate. Some people can eat the same foods all the time, not have any issues whatsoever. It's just you have to do what works for you as an individual, and just eat food, pay attention. You can do food elimination diets. There's a download on my site that's on myersdetox.com that's totally free. It's on the sidebar where it says free ebooks. And there's the Modern Paleo Survival Guides. There's a little sheet on there on how to do a food elimination diet and certain foods you always want to avoid. And so you could start there with doing a food elimination diet and see if there's any foods that are problematic for you. You can also do an MRT, food sensitivities test. Not 100% accurate, no test is, but it's a pretty good test to do. But lots of good food sensitivity tests on the market if you're having problems. So Jill, so even bioidentical hormones. So yes, bioidentical hormones still are estrogens, even though they're mostly natural. But if you have high estrogen levels, doesn't matter if it's synthetic or natural, that's still going to increase copper levels. Typically, people get too much estrogen when they're taking or hormone replacement therapy, even if it's natural or bioidentical. So that can cause problems and cause copper levels to rise, but not for everyone. Everyone's a little bit different. But if you are on HRT, you want to be hyper aware of the potential for excess copper in your body. So Amy, so my son's heavy metal test does not have copper on it. I know his ferritin is high, and we're doing further testing on that. Is there a relation? I missed the first few minutes. I think our conversation today, it's a little bit beyond talking about the relationship between ferritin and copper. It's just a very individual thing. And so I'm not going to get into that today. But yeah, essentially it's just a complex relationship between copper and ferritin and zinc and ceruloplasmin. But so it's just beyond the scope of our conversation today. So Olga, I'm taking Opta MSM up to 2 tablespoons a day. Should I be worried about copper toxicity, or should I take molybdenum as well to prevent it? So MSM is a sulfur-based product, and 2 tablespoons a day might be quite a lot. I mean, I know there's a lot of, articles saying MSM is amazing and sulfur is great for this. I don't find a lot of people need to be supplementing with sulfur. And in fact, a lot of people have sulfur metabolism issues. And so I tend to be very, very cautious with giving people supplements with sulfur in them, like fish oils, like some people can have issues with NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and other kind of sulfur-based compounds. So you might want to stop taking it for a little while and just see how you feel. If maybe you feel better, A lot of people have genetic issues with sulfur metabolism, but taking molybdenum, molybdenum is another way to pronounce it phonetically. That can be really helpful to metabolize excess sulfur if you're taking a lot of it, or if you're eating a lot of sulfur-based foods like cabbage and cauliflower and broccoli, onions, garlic, egg yolks, things of that nature. Those can bother some people, but if you take molybdenum or molybdenum, 500 micrograms or maybe one milligram for some people with the food can really, really be helpful to enjoy sulfur-based foods. You're just molybdenum deficient. So just an experiment you can do. So Jennifer, so my 4-year-old daughter's copper level is 110 on the doctor's data hair mineral analysis. So that's going to be 1.1 on a regular hair tissue mineral analysis. We don't have copper piping in our house. My copper levels nor my husband's are high. Is this dangerous high in my daughter? So no. So, well, actually that's 11. I apologize. So that's an 11 copper level. That is very, very high. That's a very high copper level. I don't want to say it's like dangerous, but it is something that you want to address with your practitioner. Definitely, I'd probably get her started on some 500 micrograms of molybdenum. But again, I need to see someone's health history and see the complete person. Sometimes people can be just detoxing or releasing copper on any given hair mineral analysis, and then the following or subsequent ones, the copper level is normal and it's fine. So you want to look at a series of tests and see if the copper level stays high. Then we know there's probably copper issues. Maybe some blood testing is warranted, doing the ceruloplasmin, ferritin, copper level, plasma, zinc, things like that, and then work with your practitioner to develop a good plan to reduce her copper levels. So Katarina, so to be age-wise, I'm 52 and started your detox protocol 1 month ago and would like to encourage my 76-year-old mother to detox from heavy metals and also my children who are 26, 23, and 12. Is it easier for younger people to detox? So yes. So the thing with younger people, especially children, they have very fast metabolism. So they tend to detox much, much easier and faster than an adult. And the converse is true as well. People that are older, that are in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. I have clients that are in their 80s. I love it. I had one client that's 85 years old trying to detox. I love that. I respect that so much. But people that are older, they have a little bit of a tougher time because their metabolism has slowed, and so it just takes a lot longer process. It's just a lot longer. It takes longer for them to detox. So you just keep that in mind. And you just usually have to do a detox program longer for a few years as opposed to like a year, say with a child who's like 7 years old. Children detox very, very, very quickly. So Bernadette, have you got any experience with people with Wilson's disease? So Wilson's disease, I have never personally worked with somebody with Wilson's disease. It's fairly rare. But that is something that causes a copper imbalance in people. But unfortunately, I think it's just beyond the scope of our conversation. I don't have any experience working with it. There is information about that to a limited degree on Dr. Lawrence Wilson's website, drlwilson.com. You can get some information on his site about Wilson's disease. But no more questions from you guys, so we're going to close this out here. Thank you so much for joining me on today's Facebook Live. We're going to be doing this every week on every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. I love, love, love doing these, and I so appreciate you guys joining me talking about all about detoxification. It's my very favorite subject because I think it's incredibly important, and it's the missing key that so many people are looking for when they're trying to recover their health. So many of my clients come to me, they're eating an amazing diet, they're taking really high quality supplements, they're exercising, they're trying to sleep, they're doing everything right, trying to reduce stress and do grounding, do biohacking, all this stuff. And it's not working because the true underlying root cause of their fatigue and their symptoms are heavy metals and chemicals, which we're exposed to every day in the air, food, and water. So very, very important to factor in and add detoxification as part of your health regimen. Not something you do every spring or once a year, something you're doing for life. Adding detoxification to your health regime as a lifestyle, and it's required. The people doing that, taking detox supplements, monitoring their metals, bringing their metal levels down, and detoxing for life are the ones that are going to be living the life they want, have the energy and brain function that they want, and living a long, disease-free, medication-free life. I truly believe that. I'm very passionate about that, and that's why I do what I do and work so hard to bring you guys so much information and content about detoxification. It's very, very important. So I appreciate you guys joining me on my journey and learning from me and tuning in every week. So appreciated. So thanks so much, you guys, for joining me, and I will see you next week.